Well, thank you all for joining. You are at the Hive think tank. And so we'll get started with introductions as more people join the event. And so my name is T.M. Ravi, and I'm the managing director of the Hive. And we have an exceptional panel for you today. But first, I'd like to just introduce my colleague, Olivia. Do you want to just turn on your video so people can meet you? So Olivia, many of you knew Matty Watt from the past, and so Matty has moved on and relocated to another part of the country. And so we have Olivia, who's going to manage the Hive think tank. So welcome, Olivia. And so with that, if you go to the next slide, please, Olivia. So the Hive think tank is a thought leadership forum. And so we host typically events every other week, talks, panel discussions on a variety of topics that you see below. We've been doing this since 2012 and hope to come back to in-person events sometime in the fall timeframe. If you go to the next slide, please. We want to thank especially our sponsors, sponsors of the Hive think tank, TIBCO, Avanta Ventures. Avanta is the corporate arm, venture arm of CSAA, the insurance company, and Gamuda. Gamuda is a large Southeast Asian infrastructure company, physical infrastructure company. So if you are part of an organization that'd like to become a sponsor of the Hive think tank, please reach out to Olivia at the email address here. Next. A little bit about the Hive. The Hive is an early stage investor. The common thread across all our companies is that they tend to be applications and use cases of data and AI. If you go to the next slide, here you'll see some of the focus areas for us: fintech, insurtech, enterprise, supply chain, health tech are some of the main focus areas. We typically invest between $1.5 million to $3 million at the pre-seed or seed stage, and then follow on subsequently. What differentiates the Hive is that we are a venture studio, so we are very operationally involved and join in the hip with the founders in the early stages, helping them build the company, bring on the team, drive towards product market fit, get sales repeatability, and so on before they go and raise additional financing. You'll see sort of one of our key focus areas is around Web3. Someone has an echo, by the way. Wondering if it's you, Ravi.
Most likely me.
Yeah, and so one of our focus areas around Web3, and so you see kind of across fintech and enterprise, some of those themes sort of embedded. If you go to the next slide, Olivia. We, in addition to our presence here in Silicon Valley to cover US and North America, we have separate entities in Brazil, based in Sao Paulo, in Southeast Asia, based in Kuala Lumpur, and in India, based in Bangalore. And we are hoping early next year to have the Hive Europe based in Paris and Monaco. So watch the space for more details about that. Next slide, please. We have some exciting upcoming events. On July 28th, we have two CEOs and Dr. Michael Seiden, who was president of oncology at McKesson, talk about the gaps in patient care that someone who's just been diagnosed with cancer experiences. And so it's an extremely kind of traumatic time when a loved one or you are sort of one of us has to deal with this. And there's lots of gaps. So this panel will kind of cover that. Next slide. Following that, we have an event which is on the general theme of lean data, where the first generation of AI models depended on very large amounts of data and high quality data, and typically kind of this applied well in the advertising and consumer areas. But as you see in sort of industrial processes and energy, you don't have those volumes of data. And so how are models evolving to leverage smaller amounts of data is the topic of this event. And finally, we have an event which is similar along the same themes of today's event, is the future of the enterprise decentralized. And so joining my colleague, my partner and chief product officer of the Hive, Kamesh, the CTO of TIBCO, Nelson, and the SVP of Corp Dev at Blockstream, David. So with that, I'm incredibly excited to introduce Raghu Madhubushi, a good friend, a colleague, a partner of us. He's an early stage investor at National Grid. He has a very distinguished background as an investor across a number of different. We first met him when he was at GE Ventures. He's been at SRI Ventures and a number of other firms before that. And Raghu will introduce his co-panelists. Raghu?
Thanks, Ravi. Thanks. Kudos to the work you guys do. Very happy investor as well. So Raghu Madhubushi, we have two just phenomenal founders and investors all rolled into one today, Jules Miller and Andrew Yang. So just a quick word on National Grid Partners itself. National Grid, of course, is the big utility in the UK, both gas and electric, transmission and distribution. And then they are also the utility in the Northeast in the US, I think like 5 states. National Grid Partners, the team, we are investing, we are the investing arm, VC arm of National Grid. We are mainly investing into what's now called energy transition space. And I specifically look at a little bit early stage data infrastructure and just broader enterprise software to support the digital transformation piece that backs this whole decarbonization and decentralization effort that the industry is going through. So let's quickly get started. I think I've worked with both Jules and Andrew in multiple roles in the past, but love to get Jules to talk a little bit about how she got here, what she's doing, what's exciting, and then Andrew to follow on and just introduce yourself. Jules?
Perfect. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. My name is Jules Miller. I'm a partner at a fund called Mindset Ventures. So we're a traditional early stage venture capital fund. We do seed to Series B investments in enterprise software. And as part of that, I do some investing in Web3. Prior to Mindset, I was at IBM running their blockchain ventures group. And in the effort to do more Web3 investments, because it is kind of something that is just, you have to kind of be in the flow and doing it all the time in order to really understand what's going on in the space. We have launched a really interesting initiative called VC3 DAO, which is a decentralized autonomous organization for venture capital investors. So we now have 157 investors, including Raghu, as part of our membership. And we are trying to see what decentralized venture capital would look like at scale, and using the tools and everything, and being decentralized and being Web3 native ourselves. So it's really interesting effort. I can talk a little bit more about that. But overall, it's been all of my time looking at interesting startups and trying to make sure that the crypto, Web3, and blockchain spaces are mature and growing and continue to have the impact that they have the potential to have. But we're still at the very beginning of that journey.
Thanks, Jules. I think we can go deep into the learnings. But Andrew.
Yep. Thank you, Raghu. I'm very excited to be here. So my name is Andrew Yang. I'm the co-founder of a project in a company called Cultos, and we enable any direct-to-consumer brand, any creator, any influencer to bring rewards, loyalty, influencer marketing to Web3 by essentially launching their own token and rewarding their customers, their followers, their fans for various actions that help the brand out. In terms of how I got here, previously I was the founder of a company called Authenticity, and we built a blockchain product for supply chain. It was actually during this time that I met Raghu while he was still at GE. They liked what we were doing. They brought in my team as EIRs. We worked with large industrials in GE Aviation, Lockheed Martin. We had a ledger that could unite the buyer and the supplier supply chain data together and eliminate disputes. And then, the pandemic hit with COVID, the aerospace industry and other industrial verticals, tanked quite significantly. But an LP of one of our investors turned out to be one of the biggest toy companies in the world, MGA Entertainment. They make Bratz, LOL Surprise. They have several $1 billion a year in revenue, massive fan base, and that really opened us up to the world of social tokens, NFTs, and the massive direct-to-consumer potential for Web3 as a whole. And so, in the past year and a bit, we've launched the Cultos product with the same team. We announced a partnership this year with MGA Entertainment. They actually invested directly in the Cultos token. We launched with an NBA team, the owners and investor as well. And we did a pretty interesting token pre-sale on the Republic platform, which sold out in hours. And so lastly, before I just kind of hand it back to Raghu, anyone who joins us today from the Cultos Discord, if you tweet the hashtag Cultos Rewards, please, on Twitter, you might get a token related surprise in the near future. And yeah, that's it. Back to you, Raghu.
Awesome. So I don't know if you guys caught the last part of what Andrew said. So you do get rewarded with tokens for tweeting. So I think this is an interesting sort of segue into at least Jules. How did you get here, right? Meaning, look, you've had an interesting journey. There is Web3 that we are talking about today, but how did it evolve, say, from Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, and how did that sort of personally influence you to go down this path? So if you can share a little bit of what you did at IBM, and even before that, I know there's some interesting, shall I say, RegTech background, which likely helps you. So I'd love to get that perspective, because I think a lot of people will either want to transition or looking to transition or play both sides of this if there is a divide. So yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit.
Sure. So I am also getting a note that my internet connection is unstable, which is unusual because it never does that, but let me know if you can't hear me for any reason. So I got into the blockchain and crypto world from the fabulous and very glamorous world of legal. I founded 2 companies in the legal tech space, and then was doing angel investments in the legal tech space, and started seeing some of the early smart contracts companies. I also had worked for a Big 4 accounting firm earlier in my career. And so I got really excited about blockchain because it was legal and tax and like audit tech, which is maybe not how most people get into the space. But to me, it was always so funny why there's all this excitement about foundational technology that is essentially like around contracts and accounting. But I love that stuff, and I'm glad that everyone else now likes that stuff. But that's where I came from it as. I went eventually into IBM. So I started out running IBM's blockchain garage, which was kind of their MVP shop. So we were working on MVPs for large Fortune 500 companies in a variety of places, focusing on using Hyperledger specifically, which is a permission blockchain. And then I helped launch and run the blockchain ventures group there, so we were investing in and partnering with with blockchain companies, and also ran 2 accelerators with Columbia University. So that's how I kind of got into the space. And I will say I had been a holdout on crypto for a while. Like I hadn't, I was like, you know, it's blockchain, not crypto, right? You know, there was a like a phase where that was very interesting. And I still believe fundamentally in the power of blockchain in things like supply chain that Andrew's working on, and like other things. But the more I get into the space and the longer I kind of dive in, the token economy is a critical part of that. It really changes everything. And I think you've got to be familiar, you've got to be comfortable in tokens and the foundational blockchain technology in order to really understand what's going on here.
Super. Any surprises, you know, just in that, maybe not a transition, but just in that path, that surprises that were contrary to what you came in with? So, you know, there's a school of thought where just go build stuff, you know, don't worry about regulations, you know, until somebody comes knocking on the door. I'm not advocating for that path, neither is Jules likely, but and then there is let's do it the right way. This is longer term. So any other surprises in some of the early decisions you took and what you've learned?
Yeah, it's tough. I think you have to, there is obvious in an industry that is supposed to help with like fraud and transparency, there is an enormous amount of fraud and lack of transparency. And so what's interesting is like, you can't be on either side of that, right? You can't go too fast without like completely disregarding the regulatory infrastructure and the like existing way things happen, but you also can't be too conservative because you will never get anything done. So I think the real lesson learned is like, you've got it, like in a big corporate environment, like they were too slow, right? And they didn't push the boundary enough, and they were too cautious. In some of the startups that we see, they're too loose and too fast and too risky, and not really paying attention to what needs to happen in order to do this in a sophisticated way. So you kind of have to balance both of those things, and it's very tricky. And I don't see a lot of companies doing that well. They're usually too far on one side or the other. But all you can do is try and learn and, you know, react and adapt. But it is extremely difficult.
Awesome. And Andrew, from your side, I know you touched a little bit, but any surprises? I know these were sort of happy accidents that you maybe pivoted from being more supply chain focused and sort of provenance focused, which is what authenticity, the name implies. But any other surprises? How the initial MGA engagement came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say one of the biggest surprises, at least to myself at least, was just, and maybe this is specific to what we're working on and kind of the communities or customer bases that an MGA, for example, has, you know, Gen Z, Gen Alpha kids, but that generation as a whole. So specifically Gen Z and Gen Alpha, they seem to be very well versed in the fundamentals of Web3 already, which was pretty interesting and very surprising. You know, my own personal theory, and maybe there's data out here to kind of back this up, is just they were immersed from it pretty much from the get-go in the way that they've grown up, right? Like they grew up with Fortnite, they grew up with Roblox, they grew up with all these, you know, kind of play to earn games on their iPad connected to their parents' credit card accounts. And, you know, a lot of the same fundamentals within those metaverses, if you will, kind of apply directly to a token economy or are exactly the same. So it's very interesting to see just how, you know, ready, quote unquote, they are for the transition from Web 2 to Web 3, at least within that direct to consumer space. So I found that very interesting. Specific to kind of our own journey within Cultos, just kind of the importance of community for our own product as well. You know, like we as a product, we enable any brand to supercharge their own community of customers with branded tokens. But as it turns out, it's actually very critical to have your own community, you know, around your own token and keep them engaged as well across the various platforms where you currently do this, Discord, Twitter, Telegram, or otherwise. So that was kind of interesting and a bit of switch of gears as well.
Yeah, maybe one quick reflection is, you know, I think you started out in the supply chain side of things, and you know, a lot of macro pain that we are going through today. Not that that's specifically an issue you went after, but it seems like maybe it was a little early, the pain wasn't there. Any reflections on that? Just given where we are today, where, you know, supply chain visibility and planning and all that has become front left and center for a lot of corporations. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The timing definitely is very interesting, and supply chain visibility, inventory visibility, supplier visibility, all of that has certainly come front and center. I mean, with just the obvious headlines, the energy crisis, commodity shortages, all that kind of stuff. I think perhaps unfortunately though, the same aversions that these large corporates will have to adopting kind of a decentralized, product for the purposes of tracking and eliminating these issues will probably still remain, especially when it comes to, a lot of these issues from what we saw could be solved by kind of having a united ledger between, supplier and the supplied or the buyer. The issues is less at of an unwillingness to share data and more just the, technical complexities in terms of the different systems both sides are using. Maybe one side's using no systems, maybe they're just using Excel, the different data standards, and then just kind of compounding that complexity from one tier of the supplier to the other. Those issues are still there, as well as the kind of slow moving nature of corporates that Jules highlighted too. So if you combine those two things together, 10 years might even be a little optimistic, but I'm confident that at some point, that will materialize. But yeah, it's certainly an interesting time given everything that's going on.
Yeah, sitting inside a CVC, it's yeah, I have a very interesting on this. Olivia, do you want to run the first survey question and get some feedback, and then I'll love to segue into that whole innovation in a big company piece with Jules.
Yep, so I just ran the first question.
Awesome. If folks can quickly share their perspective, are we at peak Web3, or are we still in the early stages of the infrastructure build out?
Okay, looks like people are still voting, so I'll give it like 5-6 more seconds.
Yeah, while that's going on, Jules, I think just in the same thread that we were just pulling, right? You've seen the whole innovation, sort of disruptive technology adoption from a large company point of view. So, are there things that are there things that were again non-obvious? The difficulty for a corporation, the obvious one is, do you look at the next 12 months, or how do you look at the horizon beyond the next 12 months? And maybe they shouldn't be looking at the horizon beyond the next 12 months. So how do you think they are managing, especially in the blockchain context? Is it, wait for the innovation, or do you want to be the person actually going and doing things versus waiting for things to happen? How do you balance this from a corporate point of view?
Yeah, I was so frustrated by this. I wrote an entire book on it. So it was published by Wiley. It was called Designing the Successful Corporate Accelerator. And it talked about corporate innovation and the challenges with it. I think what's interesting is corporates are, the people in there are smart. They're keeping an eye on the technologies, and they are, in some ways can be early to test and be aware of what's going on. So what I found was that there was a lot of experimentation, right? There was a lot of doing MVPs, testing things, interest, lots of design thinking workshops and all sorts of things, but the follow through was very, very low, or the follow through takes an enormous amount of time. And I think the reason for that it also takes a key stakeholder within the company to really push it forward. So for example, and there are some problems with this that are tactical problems. It is very easy in a corporate to not ruffle feathers and to continue to have a job and get promoted and do fine. It is very difficult in a big company to try to do something new and bring in innovation because it's risky. And if it fails, your job's at risk. Or if it's successful, your job's also at risk because you're probably pushing out someone else who is embedded in a culture that you are changing, and that will put them out of a job. So therefore, you make enemies very easily. And what happens for the people who are in those roles, and I saw this over and over and over again, is that people who really want to do innovation within big companies, they take it to as much as they can, where either they hit their personal threshold of okay, I've ruffled too many feathers. I really like this job. I want to stay here. And so I have to stop. Or they keep pushing and either get isolated or burn their internal bridges and voluntarily or involuntarily leave, mostly voluntarily. So what I found was there was a lot of people who were interested in innovation. I had a lot of volunteers on my team, for example. They would use that experience and then go start their own company or leave and go to another company. And so it's a really messed up process because they have like the top of the funnel down well, like they are doing stuff, but it is very hard to move the machine in the right way and get to the end of the journey within a big company. And I think that is really what needs to change. And there need to be people willing, or there needs to be structure in order to enable those things from happening, and shielding the people who are really pushing innovation and rewarding them for failure, rewarding them for trying, rewarding them for really like taking the lead on these things, because otherwise big companies are never going to get this pushed through. There are certain cultures that are better at it than others, but the bigger the company, almost the more difficult it is.
Thanks. I like that you're advocating for a culture of failure, which is which is good. So if we, let's step back a little bit, right? I mean, there's quite a bit of talk about, Web3. I think there is like three different pieces here. Web3, which is, like completely anything you cannot fit into your budget, you can innovation budget, call it Web3, maybe you get funding, but I think can both of you reflect a little bit on what does it even mean, Web3? Are you talking tokenization? And again, what does tokenization mean? Why is that such an important piece to the puzzle for both of you, from Andrew, from your community engagement point of view, and Jules, your same thing, right? Your DAO is built on, let's say, top of a VC community, highly curated VC community. So what is tokenization? How does that manifest for you? Why is it important? And is decentralization just another buzzword, or is that also a key piece to the puzzle? And maybe the last is, sort of this, I want to say trustless, but just disintermediating, decentralizing centralized entities, whatever that thing is. Is that a call to arms, or is that really something fundamentally that's changing? Maybe starting with fintech, but yeah, love to. Jules, you want to go first and just say, what is Web3? How does it manifest?
Sure. So if you kind of map it out, right? Web 1 was like static web pages, right? It's like, and if you, they kind of like a corporate customer, right? It's like, I have a thing that I want to promote on the internet, so I'm going to do a web page and people can read it and they can't really engage in it. That was like the 90s first tech boom. Web 2 was kind of social media, right? So it was like 2004 or 5. That's when I moved to Silicon Valley. The first time was super exciting. It was like Twitter and Facebook and, all of these things where you could engage. It's more about communities. It was about like interaction on the internet, but a company was still monetizing your information, right? So it was still the beneficiary. So you got to participate, but you didn't necessarily get the upside of the value you were creating in those communities. Web 3, which is really powerful, you might not notice it as much on the front end, right? You might not be, but what it is like a back end technology that is really powerful in empowering the individual to capture the value that they create online. And so that really comes into tokens, right? So if you can, instead of like Facebook monetizing you with ads when you're engaging on Facebook, if you can capture, like if you're a very active poster and you're posting pictures that brands want to use, if you can capture that value using tokens or using some sort of decentralized tracking of information that you can then monetize, that is extremely powerful. And so what decentralization does, and Web3 is all about decentralization, is it allows people who contribute value to receive value back. And that's something that hasn't really happened in Web 2 and Web 1. So it's pretty powerful. You can go into a lot of detail. Sometimes people also include like data and AI in Web 3. I tend to focus it mostly on blockchain and decentralization, and the token economy is a really big part of that.
Love it. Maybe that's a good transition to Andrew. I know one of the areas you're trying to enable is in the value chain itself. We are going away from this whole cookie-based approach where effectively the pipe, right, like the social network or the intermediary holds almost maximum power. It's not the brands, it's not the consumers, and hence the value whoever captures the value, it's actually the intermediary that ends up capturing most of the value, whether it's through advertising or other means. Is that changing necessarily? Is that what you're trying to do aspirationally to give back power to the brands or to the consumers? Can you talk a little bit from what you're doing around tokenization, around working with these big brands? What's the key driver from the brand's point of view?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say it's changing and kind of aligning with the right sort of changes that are happening, whether the brands like it or not. And certainly the intermediaries don't like it, which I think you touched on, which is the death of cookies, with recent software updates, like from Apple, for example, where brands really now have to think about how they can incentivize the consumers to give up or to give to them their first-party data when they're unable to use third-party tracking cookies, at least in the same way that they could before on these massive, social media networks, which are essentially intermediaries, which is what I think Jules was going into as well. So that's definitely something that we're focused very heavily on too. The way that we kind of describe the incentives that we create for consumers to willingly give these brands, their engagement, but also their personal data, which is kind of like a virtual good that can be commoditized and controlled by the consumer through tokenization. Is we like to use the analogy of like online artists like Billie Eilish, for example. Like she was discovered by early fans on YouTube when she was just kind of getting started, and it was basically through digital word of mouth that she grew bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually that got the attention of CAA in Hollywood and the recording studios, and then she exploded and she blew up. She became really famous. But those early fans, they weren't rewarded for their sweat equity in the same way that pre-seed or seed stage investor who put money into a startup would be, when that startup, early days, small committed believers and early adopters, eventually blows up in IPOs. They didn't see the return, if you will, from that. Which is kind of one of the faults we would say of Web 2, where it's very one-sided and the intermediary gets all of the benefit. So that's why one of the main value propositions that we can offer to brands, and by extension their consumers with Cultos, is through tokenization, where we can enable the brands to incentivize their consumers by giving them tokens. Where if we're talking about like an early brand, for example, like maybe some small apparel company, primarily on Instagram, early dedicated consumer base that's just discovered it. If they spread awareness of this brand through word of mouth and get the brand's tokens, then presumably when the brand gets really big and the community of token holders, which is their customers, gets really big as well, and maybe the brand gives back more to their consumers through the way of digital rewards, actual Web 2 rewards, exclusive experiences, things that these consumers can use their tokens for, then perhaps the value of these tokens increases over time as well, and the consumers see the upside, presumably, right? So essentially rewarding these dedicated and loyal customers for their loyalty to the brand in a way that wasn't possible through Web 2. So that's definitely a big incentive that we're able to offer the brands and by extension their consumers, which gets the brands kind of back to where they were in terms of the data that they're able to collect from the consumers now that third-party cookies are kind of going out the door in some instances.
Let's take a quick, thanks for that, Andrew. Let's take a quick audience question thing as they roll in. One quick question, actually, this is for you, Andrew. How is this different from getting a monetary benefit like a discount? Or maybe even touching on what other examples have been there before. Airline frequent flyer miles are frequently used as an example, but can you touch on what's new in the new sort of iteration of this? Is it just about liquidity, meaning being able to actually, I won't put words into your mouth. Why don't you share what you feel is different this time around?
Absolutely, but I think you already knew where I was going to go with it. So it's a great question, and the main way that we say that this is different from Web 2 examples of a similar thing, like discounts or loyalty points or airline miles, for example, is if you look at a loyalty point, for example, it has a static value that's kind of confined within the ecosystem of that one brand, typically, right? And with inflation, maybe that value kind of goes down over time too, which is sort of another angle to it. The difference with the token is, number one, it has a real monetary value, and it also has full control in terms of what the consumer can do with it, right? Like if they get this token, let's say Nike token, for example, maybe through many different levers, increase utility, increase community size, whatever, that token, more liquidity, results in that token's value increasing in the future, and there's upside that rewards the consumer for actions that a loyalty point can't do. That's certainly one aspect of it. Another aspect I would say is the interoperability, where this is kind of going into the upcoming roadmap of Cultos, but you can envision an exchange of tokens across these different brands where there's significant network effects that benefit everybody, right? Because if you're able to get Nike's token and exchange it for Walmart token, if you want, for example, and not just be confined to the rewards that Nike's created, but also by extension, the rewards that Walmart's created as well, and just apply that to all the other brands on this same exchange, then it's like every brand can offer their consumers the rewards of all these other brands, not just themselves. So there's just more value for everybody as a whole. So I think it's a combination of the liquidity, the interoperability, and then ultimately the network effects that differentiates a token from an airline mile, for example.
Super awesome. Thanks for this. Olivia, do you want to run the second question to get some feedback? And yes. I do have a couple of questions rolling in from Roshan and Asmi. Yeah, do you guys cringe when people compare the current hype to the bubble days of 2000? What hype?
Did we make this question like 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago? Is this a bubble?
Yeah, a lot of wounds there. Actually, Jules, there's one question that's rolling in that might be a good one for you to opine on, which is, how do you match a creator's value with a utility or token on a blockchain? I know you guys have invested in some of these creator ecosystems. So if you can reflect what your learnings have been, and how are you looking at this creator economy, if you will, and how that gets decentralized?
Yeah, sure. So, and I think it also goes to, so there was another question about how can you give an example of how a user can get rewarded for their activity on Web3? So I think that the short answer to all of this is we don't have it right yet. It's still hard. We're still messing things up. Like, I'll give you a specific, so how can you get rewarded for your activity on Web3? Like, one is you do the work in a Web3 native environment where there is a token economy, right? So I've been very deep in the world of DAOs for the last 8 months or so, because we launched one, and DAOs are really interesting because they have a mechanism called a bounty, right? And so the bounty is a number of tokens for a specific work. So it's compensation for like a gig job, basically. It's like, if you create a video, a marketing video for us, then you get X number of tokens. So I think it's like, you have to know that there is a Web3 native token economy there. You do the work and you receive the tokens. There are other things like the Brave browser is one people always use, although that hasn't been as popular as we had hoped. It's like, instead of Google, advertising to you on the browser and receiving the benefits, like, you get a basic attention token, the BAT, which is their token. So if you watch an ad, you get the token and you receive that value from being a consumer of that information. In terms of how you figure out the number of tokens and the rewards to give, we're still figuring it out. So with our DAO, the VC3, we're experimenting right now, because I think you have to figure out, like, hey, if we give tokens for deal flow, right? So if you submit a deal to we're an investment DAO, so we're investing in things and we're having our members submit deals. And if they submit a deal and we do the deal, then we give them tokens. If one person sends like a 20-second email and like fills out a form for like 3 minutes and it's a great deal, is that better or worse and worth more or less tokens than someone who spends like 10 hours mapping out the market and saying, I'm picking the best company in a particular space and then submitting it? Is that equal or is that not equal? I don't know. I mean, it's probably equal of it's probably based on the actual result, which is the investment success. And so we're experimenting with these things. There's also things where we say like, okay, we need this thing done. And we offer tokens and then no one does it, which means we probably haven't offered enough tokens or people don't perceive the value as much. So I would say like, these are all things that like, this is the nature of the industry right now. It is still very early. It's some tokens are better than none, but right now we're giving too many tokens for things that aren't worth those tokens. We're getting too few tokens for things that are worth more, and we're just figuring it out. And I think this is where like the analytics and AI and the more data and the more use we have in these things, the better we will get at it. But it's still kind of crazy. That's what's fun about it, right? Is like, if you really wanted to, you could kind of game the system and like go in and get tokens and for things for not doing a lot of work. But that's not the ethos behind it. What you could do, like, I think you just know that it's the beginning and it'll get better and more interesting. And so the more people participate, the better we'll get at it.
Got it.
Not a great answer, kind of a non-answer, but it's the truth.
No. I think it goes down interesting, let's say, rabbit hole, which also begs the question. See, one of the promises, at least from a VC3 DAO point of view, this decentralized VC point of view, is sort of the ability or the promise of lowering the barrier, whether it's for a certain type of investor, talk about diversity and all that, or even for the founder, right? Because the way the deals are sourced, the way the community opines on the deals, like the whole thing is very flattened, if you will. It's not quite as hierarchical. It's not quite as maybe if even if I should use the old boys network thing. So how is that a real principle or a goal? Are you seeing early, early shoots of that actually coming to play in the deals that you've sourced? Yeah, it'll be interesting to hear more from a decentralized VC point of view, how that's genuinely helping, let's say, flatten this ecosystem, if you will.
Yeah, I'll say Web3 in general is kind of amazing because just participating is what gives you, you can participate from pretty much anywhere. So I'm involved in several DAOs and I'm always amazed at like, there's people from every continent, every background, every age group, every ethnic variety, every religion, like it is the access is just like the ability to use the tech and the interest in participating and doing the work. And so generally the Web3 is diverse in a sense that like it's you can have access to things that otherwise you wouldn't. Like not everyone could go to Silicon Valley and be part of a startup before, but now you can be part of Web3, right? No matter where you are in the world. I will say for VC3, this has been an ethos of us, and we do this intentionally from the beginning, is to say, hey, we want a more diverse portfolio in many, many ways, what that means than the typical Silicon Valley fund. So if you say like, Silicon Valley in particular is notorious for being like, we need to invest in companies that are in our city, right? So that we can see you, we can connect. That's changed a little bit. But the beautiful thing about what we're doing at VC3 DAO is we've got 28 countries represented with the 157 VCs that are in our community right now, and it's expanding every day. We have 28 countries represented. Everyone's submitting deals. They're all professional investors. They're submitting deals that they like, that they do in their own countries with their own flavor on it. Everyone has a slightly different investment thesis, slightly different networks. And so we're getting really interesting, really diverse deals from all over the world, number one. And then because we actually have a fairly diverse membership, I think 40% of our leadership is women, half of them are people of color, like 40% are outside of the US. And so it's still kind of US centric, but it is much better than your typical VC firm. So when we have discussions about every deal, someone will point out like, hey, this looks like this other deal, or they don't have any women on their team. Like, this is interesting. Like, do we like this deal? So you just get differences of opinion as well that make us be stronger investors. But I think like anything, the technology can allow diversity. It's also part of the people in the using the technology and leading the organization's responsibility to make sure that happens, because you can still, if you look at like the traditional crypto space, there's still a lot of white bros, right? Like this is kind of just how the crypto world is. And what we really want to do is change that, because we want everyone to be able to capture the value of this new technology and then like what we think will be the next internet. And so we have to do it intentionally, but the technology does make it easier.
Yeah, no, I think the only flip side, or not even flip side, but what we should be careful about is this whole sort of madness of crowds and how a couple of bad actors, if you're not structuring your DAO properly and learning from others' mistakes, you can, it can quickly devolve into either madness of crowds or some bad actor overtaking good intentions, if you will. Andrew, actually, I think you have a little bit of perspective on raising capital, not crowdsourced, but in a slightly non-traditional way, although you did raise from a traditional VC as well. Any interesting like learnings or anything interesting that you want to share based on what you've done both? It's not fully decentralized in some ways, but it is sort of Web 2.5, if you will. So anything on the fundraising side from a startup point of view?
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, like you said, we've raised capital kind of the traditional equity path, but we also did a token pre-sale on the Republic platform, which is definitely a very different experience, kind of raising through a Web3 channel for the first time. It was interesting because there's just so much more emphasis on community management and marketing, and also kind of establishing relationships and trust with the right influencers, if you will, that kind of have the sway and trust of their own communities and can kind of direct them to exciting projects that they believe in. All that stuff was really key. The speed was quite astounding as well. Like, we listed on Republic like 5 p.m. on a Friday night, and I think there was so much traffic immediately that the site went down several times, and they actually had to call up engineers from bed basically to check out AWS and reallocate some bandwidth and get the site back online. Which is funny now, but at the time it was scary because we thought we weren't going to close the round, but we did. We raised 5 million in those several hours. And I'd say one of the key differences there, kind of going back to what I was talking about, with communities, the community itself, like, instead of just sort of being beholden to a few investors and kind of a small group of committed individuals, internally and externally in the beginning, like a private startup, we immediately have accountability to this community of 5,000 plus investors through Republic that are kind of the early token holders of the Cultos ecosystem, and we have a responsibility to, and they can also help us out in a meaningful way as well. Like, they all have connections to potential brands, influencers, other individuals who may believe in the project that may be useful later on. So it's kind of been an interesting experience, just kind of being thrown immediately into that place where we have to kind of manage the community in that way, which seems to be pretty typical across Web3 as well. So that's been different and interesting.
Super. I do have a question, and maybe Olivia, we can run the next survey question, and then I'll take the question from the audience while that's going on. Are you working on or exploring tokens, Web3 related mechanisms to reward your customers? Yeah, please share your perspective. So one question on ESG sustainability goals 2030. Yeah, it is energy hungry. So actually there is a flip side to this coin as well. And I'll talk because we have a portfolio company that's basically running a data center with renewables, but also are using the mining infrastructure. So this is all like blockchain mining as a demand response mechanism. So when there is excess capacity of electricity and whatnot and pricing, there isn't loads available. But given the dynamic nature of the blockchain loads, they are actually using some of that to manage their infrastructure. So it's an interesting take on using something like blockchain to help with demand response. So that was maybe a quick data point on some interesting business models. Ravi, how are we doing on time? Do we need a sort of
there are some questions in the Q&A button, so you may want to jump to those.
Okay, there's a question on stable coins. I understand there is value in staking them, but as more capital goes into stable coins, will they be any different than earning interest on your savings? I understand other tokens like brand tokens or art-related tokens have intrinsic value. But what if anything will drive up the value of stablecoins? I mean, I did have a quick question to Jules and Andrew around if you sort of put your speculatory hats on, if you will, if that's a real word, and kind of share what you think the sort of state of the world will be in, say, 5 years. And there are risks, right? There is regulatory risk, there is legal risk, SEC stepping in. We saw Luna going bust. It's touching on, so there is like real risks here. So, maybe the flip side to that is there are opportunities. So what are you seeing sort of these areas to go after? So if there are entrepreneurs here who are thinking about problems worth solving, can you share your perspective, Jules, and maybe then Andrew?
Yeah, there's a lot in that one. So I think in general, what does the world look like? So I think there is unlimited opportunity in Web3 right now. However, I think people forget how early we are in the process and how risky it is fundamentally. And things like Terra Luna remind us that this is not a sophisticated industry yet. And there's a lot of people participating who don't really understand it. And so I think that, to me, this is the nature of innovation, right? It's the beginning of something that will take decades probably to become more sophisticated and less risky. But also, at the beginning is when it's most interesting and when you can capture the most value. So what I would say is, like, if you are interested in Web3, there's a lot of opportunity, whatever that is. I personally focus on enterprise blockchain, which I think, is less about crypto, is a little bit less volatile. I'm not trading, trading tokens, invest in tokens. I hold them. And I'm usually investing in early stage stuff that might not even be liquid. I think if you are an entrepreneur, I would say find like the Web3 version of the Web2 thing that you already know. Right? If you're already doing something, like, what is the Web3 version of this? And I think that there is probably an interesting application there, and you already come to the table with some sort of knowledge. So where the world will be in 5+ years is, I think that the industry will become more sophisticated. There will be more actual structure around some of this stuff. There will be ways to minimize risk. So, like, for example, we've looked at several insurance related products on crypto, so that you're hedging your risk profile. If you're making investments, you can have insurance if there's any sort of a rug pull or any sort of issue. I think that there's like more sophisticated financial instruments. So, like, we invested in a company that is doing like options and perpetual futures trading on one of the crypto, one of the layer ones. That is really, really interesting. And this brings a level of like financial engineering and financial sophistication, like derivatives, to the crypto space, which is currently not, like, it's still in the early stages. So I think it's all of this maturity that will happen around what's already happening in Web3, which is still, very renegade. I think the last thing that will have to happen, and I think will be welcome, even if it's a little difficult, is the regulatory environment will be much clearer. It may not be what we like, but I think the biggest risk in all of this, and we face this on a daily basis, is we don't know what the SEC is going to do, right? So we're operating in very gray zones. If they just actually give guidance, it would be much, much more, we would have a better ability to operate in the environment and do things in the right way and make decisions in the right way. When there's so much gray area and they're going after people after the fact, when something goes wrong, or because they decide that's the thing that is interesting that day, it is difficult for serious people with real capital and real risk to their brand and their company and their personal, personal career, to get into the space in a very serious way if there's not regulatory clarity. And so I don't know, again, we might not like where the regulatory environment is going, but if there's clarity, I think that would be a step in the right direction.
And just to follow up, do you feel like FINRA or SEC or any of these federal agencies can lean in more or can lead more than what they are doing, being a little bit more reactionary? Are there roadblocks for them to do certain actions like that? Or like, what's your take, where we'll be, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, they can and they are, right? And they are doing things in a way that is probably more conservative than most of the people in the crypto industry would like. I think they're too slow, number one, but I do think that they're, I actually have a very big appreciation for the regulatory agencies. I think it is important to do specifically things like consumer protection. You don't want individuals who should not be retail investors in crypto and don't have the right access to information lose all of their money into something that they didn't think was that risky because they didn't understand it. So I do think there is a place for regulation that is really, really critical. So I don't not like it. I just think they need to move faster. They need to be a little bit more ahead of the curve. And they need to also just really make sure that things are to minimize downside risk for the people who are at the most risk of really having a negative impact, and not worry about like the innovators worry of like, if VCs lose all their money, who cares, right? Like,
Yeah.
no offense to other VCs, but like we're sophisticated investors, we understand the risk. Even like a teacher in North Dakota loses all of their investment because they didn't understand how risky Ethereum was or Terra Luna was, then that is a problem that should be regulated.
Yeah, we have a question, actually, if not a startup, at least a product idea about using tokens for internally managing innovation projects and voting on innovation projects and whatnot. Love it.
I love that. So I've been talking to a lot of corporates about using DAOs for their corporate innovation teams, because I think corporate innovation teams, again, I wrote a book on this, is like super problematic for a lot of reasons. And if you could compensate people in tokens, even if it wasn't part of their day job, it would be a dramatically different model, and it really, really would work. I still think we're 10 plus years away from that actually happening, but I hope to see more experimentation, and I hope to see big companies take a step in that direction. And if anyone wants to talk to me about that, I have a lot to say on it, so feel free to reach out.
Super. Again, plug for the Hive and all the awesome folks here. August 17th, 11 a.m. is the future of the enterprise decentralized. It seems like it's an extension of this conversation, so please join. Olivia, if you want to run the last question, and then Andrew and Jules, I think we are coming up at the 12 o'clock time. So if you can, you have, let's say 30 seconds, your thoughts, what do you want out of this, folks listening in? It's your 30 seconds. So please go ahead. Jules, you want to go?
Sure. So what I would say is, do not let the current markets scare you. If you are interested in this space, stay in the space. Be careful about what you do. Don't do anything stupid, right? Like, don't give your wallet password to anyone, or like click on weird links. But like, this space is not going away, and I love down markets. This is the time to be participating in things because this is where serious businesses are built. So don't be scared. Still participate. Dive in. This is the long game. Don't expect immediate returns, but like, this is the long game. And if this industry works, which I don't see how it won't at this point, there's too many smart people working here, then it's going to radically transform, especially how we engage on the internet, and especially things around data, especially things around owning our information. And so these are things that are really, really critical to how we live our lives. So participate, do something interesting to you, do something where you have a particular expertise, and also get involved in DAOs, get involved in like crypto in whatever way that it is comfortable for you. Don't risk too much, but risk enough to make it interesting.
Thanks, Jules. Party like it's 1999. Andrew.
Yep, just very quickly, I saw a ton of interesting questions in the chat. I wish I had time to answer. Would love to answer it if anyone reaches out to me, especially if you're, a brand, influencer, creator, if you're interested in launching your own token, or have been considering the idea to engage your community, engage your consumers. Would love to chat. Other than that, thanks for having me, and hashtag Cultos rewards, please. But that's it.
Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. It's phenomenal to hear from makers, investors, from both perspectives. So I just like amazed at how much I learned just talking to both of you guys. Thank you again. Thanks, Ravi, for hosting us as well.
Thank you, Jules, and thank you, Andrew, and especially Raghu for moderating this panel. So we really appreciate it. And just the first in a series of talks and panel discussions on tokenization, other applications and use cases that are decentralized, NFTs, and how they can be connected to the old world meaning Web 1, Web 2. And so we look forward to having all of you join us. Thank you, Olivia, for making this happen.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
everyone.
Great. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys. Thank you.